The French kickboxing champion drove a spinning heel kick straight at the stranger's temple and in a blur of redirected momentum found himself twisted mid-air and pinned flat against the floor before his foot ever made contact. Jackie Chan stood above him, still smiling, still holding the drink he hadn't even set down. What happened in the next 90 seconds would become Paris's underground martial arts legend, a story whispered about for decades. Nobody in that room in Paris saw it coming. Not the film crew, not the stunt coordinators, and definitely not the 6'2", 210-pound fighter lying flat on his back, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what just happened to his entire understanding of combat. What happened in the next 45 minutes would become the stuff of Parisian martial arts legend, a story whispered about for decades in dojos, on film sets, and in the back corners of fight gyms across 3 continents. Let me take you there. It's 1984. Jackie Chan is in Paris shooting a movie called The Protector. Now forget everything you think you know about Jackie Chan from the goofy American comedies. In 1984, Jackie Chan was a machine. He'd trained at the China Drama Academy since he was 6 years old. That's not a school, that's a factory. They beat technique into children for 10 hours a day. Kung fu, acrobatics, weapons, Peking opera, pain tolerance. Jackie didn't graduate from that place. He survived it. By his late 20s, he could do things with his body that most professional athletes couldn't dream of, and he was doing them while making it look like slapstick comedy, which, trust me on this, is 10 times harder than making it look tough. So he's in Paris. The production needs local talent for a fight sequence. They put out a call to martial arts gyms across the city. They need guys who can throw real techniques on camera, guys who look dangerous, guys who can take choreography and make it sing. And Paris in the early 80s was crawling with serious fighters. Savate had been the national combat sport for over a century. French kickboxing wasn't some strip mall hobby. It was refined, brutal, technical, and the guys who competed at the top level were legitimate killers on their feet. That's how we get to our guy. His name was Jean-Marc. I'm going to call him Jean-Marc because the exact identity has been debated in martial arts circles for 40 years and different sources give different names, but the story itself has been confirmed by multiple people who were on that set. Jean-Marc was a French Savate champion, multiple national titles, built like a middleweight boxer who'd been stretched on a rack, long legs, fast hands, and a competitive record that made him one of the most decorated kickboxers in France at that time. Believe me, this guy was no joke. He walked into the gym the production had rented, a converted warehouse in the northeast part of the city. Big open space, mats on the floor, lights rigged from the rafters for the film crew. There were about a dozen other fighters milling around, all hoping to get cast as extras or stunt opponents. Jean-Marc stood a head taller than most of them. He moved with that lazy confidence that top-tier fighters carry around. You know the walk. Shoulders loose, chin slightly raised, eyes scanning without urgency because they already know they're the most dangerous person in the room. The assistant director spotted him and waved him over. "You're the Savate champion, yes?" Jean-Marc nodded. "Good. We're going to pair you with Monsieur Chan for a screen test." Now here's the thing. Jean-Marc knew Jackie Chan was an actor. He'd seen maybe one of his Hong Kong films, possibly not even that. In 1984, Jackie wasn't a global superstar yet. He was huge in Asia, enormous in Hong Kong, but in Western Europe, he was mostly unknown. To Jean-Marc, this was a movie gig. He'd show up, throw some pretty kicks for the camera, pull his strikes at the last second, and collect a paycheck. He figured the actor would know some basic martial arts poses, enough to look good on screen, and the editing would do the rest. He had no idea. Not a clue. Not one single shred of understanding about what was standing 5 feet away from him, stretching his hamstrings in a faded black t-shirt. Get this. Jackie Chan, by this point in his career, had already performed his own stunts in over 40 films. He'd broken his nose 3 times, cracked his cheekbone, dislocated his shoulder, fractured fingers on both hands, and once nearly died falling from a clock tower. Every single fight scene in his movies was him. No doubles, no camera tricks. When you saw Jackie Chan get hit on screen, Jackie Chan was getting hit. When you saw him leap off a building, that was his actual body in the actual air. The man had been in more real physical confrontations on film sets than most professional fighters see in their entire careers, and unlike those fighters, Jackie didn't get to tap out. Jean-Marc didn't know any of this. He walked to the center of the mat, bouncing lightly on his toes, and waited. Jackie finished stretching, stood up, and walked over. He was shorter than Jean-Marc by several inches, narrower in the shoulders, lighter by at least 30 pounds. He looked like someone's friendly uncle who happened to be in decent shape. He stuck out his hand, and Jean-Marc shook it, and if you could have read the French fighter's thoughts in that moment, they probably would have been something along the lines of, "This will be easy." The assistant director explained the sequence. It was a simple fight for the camera. Jean-Marc would throw a combination, Jackie would block and counter, they'd go back and forth for about 60 seconds. Standard movie stuff. The choreographer started walking them through the moves, and this is where it started to go sideways. The choreographer showed Jean-Marc a 3-kick combination, left roundhouse to the body, right roundhouse high, spinning back kick. Jean-Marc threw it once at half speed. Clean, precise, textbook Savate technique. The choreographer nodded, satisfied. Then he turned to Jackie and told him to block the sequence and counter with a sweep and a palm strike. Jackie watched Jean-Marc throw the combination one more time. Then he said, "Faster." Jean-Marc blinked. "Faster? Yes, full speed. I need to see the real timing." Now look, on a film set, you don't throw full speed at the star. That's rule number 1. You pull your strikes, you telegraph your movements, you make it safe. If you hurt the lead actor, the production shuts down, and everybody goes home without getting paid. Jean-Marc looked at the choreographer. The choreographer looked at Jackie. Jackie nodded. "Full speed," Jackie said again. "Don't worry about me." I want you to understand the position Jean-Marc was in. He was a competitive fighter being told by a movie actor to throw full-speed kicks at him. Part of him was probably thinking this was some kind of test, or maybe a translation issue. Part of him was probably thinking, "Okay, buddy, your funeral." Either way, he set his stance, took a breath, and let it fly. The left roundhouse came in like a whip, fast, sharp, aimed at the ribs. The right roundhouse followed a half-second later, arcing toward the temple. Then the spinning back kick, the money shot, the one that had knocked out actual fighters in actual competition, a full torque rotation with the heel driving straight at the solar plexus. Jackie blocked the first kick with his forearm, slipped the second by tilting his head exactly 2 inches to the left, and caught the spinning back kick, not deflected it. Not dodged it, caught it. Both hands wrapped around Jean-Marc's ankle, absorbing the impact, and in one fluid motion, Jackie twisted, pulled, and swept Jean-Marc's standing leg. Jean-Marc hit the mat, hard. The sound was a flat, heavy thud that made 3 crew members flinch. For a moment, nobody moved. Jean-Marc lay on his back, processing. Jackie stood over him, still holding the ankle, and then gently set the foot down and offered his hand. Here's what nobody tells you. Jean-Marc didn't take the hand, not out of anger, out of shock. He rolled to his side and stood up on his own, and his face had changed. The lazy confidence was gone. Something else had replaced it. His eyes were narrower, his jaw tight, and he was looking at Jackie Chan the way you look at something you've badly miscalculated. "Again," Jean-Marc said. Jackie took a step back, resetting to center mat. He rolled his neck once. "Okay." This time Jean-Marc didn't wait for the choreographed sequence. He threw a jab, a real jab, fast and straight, the kind savate fighters borrow from boxing. Jackie parried it with his right palm. Jean-Marc followed with a low chasse kick, a piston-like front kick aimed at Jackie's lead knee. Jackie lifted his leg, absorbing it on his shin, and simultaneously flicked a back fist that stopped 1 inch from Jean-Marc's nose. 1 inch. Jean-Marc jerked his head back, not because it hit him, because he didn't see it coming. Now the energy in the room was different. The other fighters had stopped talking. The crew members who'd been adjusting lights were standing still. The choreographer had his arms crossed and a very small, very knowing expression on his face. Because he'd seen this before. He'd watched Jackie Chan surprise fighters in Hong Kong, in Thailand, in Japan. He knew what was happening, and he knew what was coming next. No word of a lie, this is where it gets real. Jean-Marc circled left. His footwork was immaculate. Savate fighters have some of the best footwork in combat sports, and Jean-Marc's was elite. He feinted low, threw a high fouette, a snapping roundhouse aimed at the head, and transitioned into a reverse, a hooking kick that comes from the opposite direction. It was a combination that had won him national titles. It was fast, deceptive, and perfectly executed. Jackie ducked the first, blocked the second with his elbow, and countered with a straight punch to the chest that stopped, again, 1 inch from contact. Then he tapped Jean-Marc's chest with his open palm, gently, almost playfully. Jean-Marc stepped back. His breathing was heavier now. Not from exhaustion, from the effort of processing what was happening. He was throwing his best combinations, his competition-tested, championship-winning techniques. And this guy, this actor, was handling them the way a patient teacher handles a student's first day at the gym. And here's the part that separates this story from every other tough guy meets tougher guy tale you've ever heard. Jackie wasn't embarrassing him. That was the thing. There was no arrogance in it, no showboating. Jackie wasn't smirking or laughing or talking trash. He was just moving, flowing, responding to whatever Jean-Marc threw with perfect timing and perfect control, and every counter stopped short of contact because Jackie Chan didn't want to hurt this man. He wanted to work with him. But Jean-Marc didn't see it that way. Not yet. What Jean-Marc saw was a challenge, and champions don't back down from challenges. It's what makes them champions, and it's what gets them in trouble. Jean-Marc stepped forward and threw a right cross. Not a movie punch, a real right cross with his hip turned into it and his shoulder behind it. The kind of punch that separates consciousness from a human skull. And he threw it at full power. This is the moment, right here. This is the decisive turning point, and I want you to see it in slow motion because everyone in that room saw it in slow motion, even though it happened in less than a second. Jackie didn't block it, he redirected it. His left hand came up and touched the inside of Jean-Marc's wrist, guiding the punch past his chin by maybe 3 inches. At the same time, his right hand came underneath and pressed against Jean-Marc's elbow, locking the arm straight. And then Jackie stepped to the side, pivoted, and used Jean-Marc's own forward momentum to spin him 180 degrees, so that Jean-Marc was now facing away from Jackie with his arm extended behind him, completely controlled. Jackie held the position for 1 second, 2 seconds. Then he let go, stepped back, and tapped Jean-Marc on the shoulder. "Good power," Jackie said. "Very fast." Jean-Marc turned around, his chest was heaving, his face was flushed, and for the first time since he walked into that warehouse, the competitive fire in his eyes was being replaced by something else, something rarer and harder for a champion to feel, respect. But we're not there yet, because what happened next pushed this whole thing into a different category. The choreographer stepped forward and suggested they take a break. Jean-Marc shook his head. Jackie shook his head. Both men wanted to continue, but for different reasons. Jean-Marc wanted to understand. Jackie wanted to teach. "Show me your best kick," Jackie said. Jean-Marc paused. Then he set up in a southpaw stance, loaded his rear leg, and threw a chasse lateral, a side kick, aimed at head height. Now let me paint this for you. Jean-Marc was 6'2" with long legs, and he threw a side kick to the head of a standing person. The flexibility, the speed, the precision, it was beautiful, genuinely beautiful. The kind of kick that makes martial arts worth watching. Jackie watched it, nodded. Then he said, "My turn," and Jackie Chan, at 5'8", with shorter legs, wearing flat training shoes on a gym mat in a converted Parisian warehouse, threw a side kick that went higher than Jean-Marc's, higher, faster, with a snap at the end that made the air pop. Jean-Marc's mouth actually opened. "How?" he said. Jackie walked over to him, stood beside him, and spent the next 10 minutes showing him the mechanical differences between Savati's sidekick and the Chinese martial arts sidekick, the hip rotation, the chamber position, the way you turn the support foot. He wasn't showing off. He was genuinely, patiently, specifically teaching a national champion a better way to throw a technique the champion had been drilling for 15 years. And I swear this happened. Jean-Marc listened. The champion, the guy with the titles and the trophies and the knockout record, stood there like a white belt and listened to every word. He tried the adjusted technique. He tried it again. On the third attempt, Jackie corrected his hip angle by physically placing his hands on Jean-Marc's hip and turning it 2 degrees. Jean-Marc threw the kick again, and it was noticeably better. Jean-Marc looked at Jackie, and something broke open in his expression. Not defeat, discovery. "You're not just an actor," he said. Jackie laughed, a real warm, full-body laugh, and then he said something that the choreographer later repeated to multiple people over the following years, which is how this story survived and spread. Jackie said, "I'm an actor, but I was a fighter first, and a fighter never stops." They trained together for the rest of the day, not for the movie, for each other. Jean-Marc showed Jackie Savat combinations he'd never seen before. Jackie showed Jean-Marc kung fu techniques that made the French fighter's eyes go wide. They sparred lightly, traded kicks, worked combinations together, and at one point, Jackie demonstrated a flip off a stack of crash pads that had the entire room gasping. But here's the moment that seals this story. The moment of vulnerability that nobody expected. During a water break, Jean-Marc sat down on the mat, toweling off his face, and Jackie sat next to him. The crew was resetting lights, people were moving around them, and for a minute it was just the two of them, sitting side by side, not performing for anyone. Jean-Marc said, I came in here thinking you were just a movie star. I thought I would have to be careful not to hurt you. I am embarrassed." Jackie was quiet for a moment. He pulled off one of his training shoes and showed Jean-Marc his foot. The toes were misshapen, swollen, several of them bent at unnatural angles, old fractures that had healed wrong, scars from wire cuts, calluses thick as leather. "Every movie," Jackie said quietly, "every fight scene, I get hurt, every single one. Nobody sees it in the theater. They see the comedy, the falling, the funny face. They don't see this." He put his shoe back on. "Sometimes I think nobody understands what it costs. The audience laughs and I'm in the hospital." Jean-Marc stared at him. Then he said something in French that the choreographer translated later. He said, "Then you are braver than any fighter I have ever met, because at least we get to tap out." Jackie's expression shifted. His jaw tightened for a second and he looked at the floor. Then he looked back up and patted Jean-Marc on the knee and his face was warm again. They got back to work. Now here's where I tell you what happened with the movie, because you're probably wondering. The Protector came out in 1985, and honestly, it wasn't a great film. It was an American-produced project that tried to sand down everything that made Jackie Chan special. They cut his choreography, dubbed his voice, and repackaged him as a generic action star. Jackie hated it so much that he went back and recut the entire film for the Asian release, adding back all the fight scenes and stunts that the American producers had removed. But that gym session in Paris, that wasn't in any cut of any film. That was real. That was two martial artists from completely different worlds, different countries, different disciplines, different levels of fame, meeting on a mat and discovering that the language of combat is universal. Jean-Marc walked in thinking he was dealing with a pretender. He walked out knowing he'd spent an afternoon with one of the most skilled martial artists alive. And here's the ripple effect. Jean-Marc went back to his gym in Paris and started incorporating elements of Chinese martial arts into his training. His students noticed, his sparring partners noticed. Within a few years, the French kickboxing scene had a subtle but real infusion of techniques and principles that came directly from that one afternoon. Jean-Marc talked about it for the rest of his career. He told every student who walked through his door. He told them about the day he challenged a movie star and found out the movie star was a master. You want to know what really gets me about this story? It's not the kicks. It's not the blocks. It's not the technical wizardry of Jackie Chan, though all of that was extraordinary. It's the fact that Jackie stopped. He could have just embarrassed the guy and moved on. He could have proved his point and gone back to filming. But he didn't. He sat down next to a man who'd tried to test him, and he showed him his broken toes, and he told him the truth about what it costs to do what he does. That's the part that turns a fight story into a legend, because legends aren't about who wins. Legends are about the moment when two people see each other clearly, and neither one looks away. Now, if this story hit you the way it hit me the first time I heard it, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. I tell stories exactly like this one every single week. Real people, real confrontations, real moments that change everything. Subscribe and I promise you won't be disappointed. Let me finish this. Years later, in the early 2000s, when Jackie Chan was finally a global superstar, a massive name in Hollywood, doing press tours for Rush Hour and Shanghai Noon, a French journalist got him backstage at a European premiere. The journalist said he trained at a gym in Paris. He said his instructor always told a story about sparring with Jackie in 1984. He asked Jackie if he remembered. Jackie's face changed. The publicity smile softened into something private. He nodded slowly. "The tall fighter," Jackie said. "Savate, very good kicks. Yes, I remember him." "He says you changed the way he trained," a journalist said. Jackie was quiet for a beat. Then he leaned forward and said 5 words. "He changed me too." The journalist asked how. Jackie just shook his head and tapped his own chest right over the heart and moved on to the next interview. That's it. That's how this story ends. Not with a knockout, not with somebody lying on the floor. It ends with a man tapping his chest 20 years later in a hallway in Europe, remembering an afternoon that nobody filmed, that nobody outside of a few dozen people ever witnessed, that lived only in the memories and the muscles of the people who were there. Jean-Marc came in thinking he was the most dangerous man in the room. He threw his best, his absolute best. Championship-level techniques from a world-class combat sport. And a man 6 inches shorter, 30 pounds lighter, wearing a faded t-shirt, dismantled every single thing he threw, caught his kicks, redirected his punches, and never once hit him. Not because he couldn't, because he chose not to. And then that same man sat down on a dirty gym mat and showed a stranger his broken feet and told him the truth about pain and loneliness and the price of making people laugh. And the stranger, the champion, the guy with nothing left to prove, listened and was changed. That's not a fight story. That's a human story. And it's real. Every word of it. The French kickboxing champion didn't know he challenged Jackie Chan. Now you know what happened next. And you know why they still talk about it in Paris. Jackie Chan caught the kick, but what he really caught was something that doesn't show up on film. He caught a moment where two warriors from opposite sides of the world stopped performing and started being honest with each other. On a mat, in a warehouse, in a city where neither of them was born, they found the one thing that every fighter spends their whole life looking for, someone who understands. Jean-Marc went home that night and sat in his apartment and stared at his trophies on the shelf. He'd won those trophies by being faster and stronger and more technical than every person he'd faced. And in one afternoon, a man had made all of that irrelevant, not by being faster or stronger, by being something else entirely, something Jean-Marc couldn't name that night but spent the rest of his career trying to become. Complete. Jackie Chan was complete. Every part of him, the fighter, the acrobat, the comedian, the teacher, the man with the broken toes, it all worked together. There were no gaps, no blind spots, no separation between who he was on camera and who he was on the mat. When Jean-Marc threw that first spinning kick and Jackie caught it, Jean-Marc wasn't beaten by a technique. He was beaten by a person who had made himself whole through decades of pain that nobody saw and nobody applauded. That's what it looks like when mastery meets ego. Ego shows up with its titles and its record and its rehearsed combinations, and mastery just stands there, relaxed, patient, waiting, until ego punches itself out. Then mastery extends a hand and says, "Good power, very fast." And ego, if it's smart, if it's brave, if it's the kind of ego that belongs to a real champion, takes that hand and says, "Teach me." Jean-Marc was that kind of champion, and Jackie Chan was that kind of master. You won't find this story in any official biography. You won't find it in the DVD extras or the press kits. It lives where the best stories live, in the mouths of the people who were there, passed from instructor to student, from fighter to fighter, from one generation of martial artists to the next. It mutates a little with each telling. Some versions say it was a different movie. Some say it was Belgium, not France. Some say there were two Savate fighters, not one. But the core is always the same. A French kickboxing champion walked into a room, not knowing who he was facing. He threw everything he had at a man he mistook for a movie actor. And that man, without ever striking him, without ever raising his voice, without ever disrespecting him, dismantled his entire worldview, rebuilt it better, and left him with a story he would tell for the rest of his life. The legend was promised, and the legend was delivered. That afternoon in Paris, Jackie Chan didn't just catch a kick. He caught a man's entire understanding of fighting, held it gently in both hands, turned it around, and handed it back improved. He changed me too. 5 words. One tap on the chest, and a hallway in Europe goes quiet. That's a legend.